So he's talking about the 25th Amendment. Joining us, Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent of the New York Times, Sam Stein, Politico's deputy managing editor for politics, and Sabrina Siddiqui, White House reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Peter, Tom Friedman in the New York Times is writing, I watched the Biden-Trump debate alone in a Lisbon hotel room, and it made me weep. I cannot remember a more heartbreaking moment in American presidential campaign politics in my lifetime, precisely because of what it revealed. Joe Biden, a good man and a good president, has no business running for re-election. If it comes to that point, who would have to convince the president to pull out of the race? Now, he also went on to write that, Donald Trump was a fire hose of lies. So, Peter, that's why the stakes, he believes, is so high.
Yeah, it's worth remembering, by the way, for our viewers, that Tom is a columnist, an opinion columnist, doesn't represent the news side. So I'm a reporter. Just want to be clear on that for anybody.
I should have pointed out. I was presuming that.
Yeah, but I just want to make clear for viewers. But yeah, I mean, I think that what Tom is writing there reflects what you're hearing from a lot of Democrats today, not just Mike Johnson. In fact, actually, I think Mike Johnson's comments there are probably good for the president, because then it's going to get the dander up of the Democrats who are going to say, well, who are you to say? And, Trump is a liar and so forth. They'd rather get back into the partisan mode than grapple with what they saw last night. And what you heard, Andrew, you and I have done this for a long time. 38 years of covering politics, I've never heard a party panic the way I've been hearing him in the last 12 hours in the Democratic side. It's kind of like a political equivalent of a bank run, right? A run on the bank. They're just so concerned about this. And there is conversation about what to do and whether there should be a new nominee at this point. Even people like Senator Jeanne Shaheen, an incumbent Democratic senator, said that's a question that now is on the table. And what's remarkable for this White House is they had successfully taken it off the table with the president's strong performance at the State of the Union. And so instead of having this debate settle people's concerns about his age and performance, it's now made it the central issue for the moment.
And Sam Stein, is the big difference the teleprompter? He had a teleprompter at the State of the Union, and frankly, this White House has kept him protected from major interviews and from, impromptu sessions with the press.
Yeah, there's a couple things here at play, I think. One is the teleprompter. Obviously, it's a lot easier to read off of a script than it is to speak extemporaneously. Two is they have kept him cocooned largely, or he has himself kept himself cocooned, not doing major interviews with the press, very dutifully kept schedule that doesn't have him out in front all that often, campaign stops that are consistent but not too regular. All of that's true. And then three is, some of it is just sort of the curse of the incumbent president, but magnified by all of these issues that surround Biden. By that, I mean, and Peter's absolutely right, this is panic on a scale we haven't seen. But in 2012, you all remember, after the first Obama-Romney debate, there was an incredible amount of Democratic panic. The difference between then and now is that there was also a real confidence within the party that Barack Obama possessed the skills, the political chops, to rectify the situation, to righten the ship. And in this case, Joe Biden has not given any demonstration that he has that capacity.
And Sabrina, I guess the question would be, who around the president would say tough things to him, because he is surrounded by people who've been with him for years?
Well, that's precisely what's really challenging about this. And you've heard senior Biden advisors already rule out the prospect of him stepping aside, and in fact saying that President Biden is committed to participating in the September debate with former President Trump. I mean, I think some Democrats believe that someone like President Obama, given his influence over the party and his relationship with President Biden, might be someone who could have a conversation with him. We obviously don't know if that's something that President Obama is even considering. And of course, First Lady Jill Biden is someone, is arguably who the president would listen to the most. But what you have in Biden's inner circle is a lot of support for him, even in the aftermath of the debate, kind of trying to dismiss it as, an off night that he can still bounce back from. But just to echo what both Peter and Sam are saying, what we're hearing in our reporting at the Journal is these are Democratic allies. These are Biden's own allies, from lawmakers on Capitol Hill to wealthy donors and other surrogates, who are questioning whether or not he should remain at the top of the ticket And it's hard to see a scenario where he's not at the top of the ticket, because he would have to be willing to step aside himself. The majority of the party's delegates are already committed to him. But, the question they're all asking the morning after the debate is what can be done in the less than 5 months that remain between today and Election Day in November.
And maybe more urgently between now and the convention, Peter, because there is a process where he could step aside, and then the delegates, they would probably have to do a first ballot, or he would no longer be on the ticket. We'll have to check what the technical aspects of this are. But, who would he listen to? I don't think he would listen to Barack Obama, because it was President Obama who, passed over him for the nomination in 2016. And so that created a lot of heartburn.
Yeah, I hear Democrats say that if Yeah, I agree. I think I've heard Democrats say that if Obama were to make such an intervention, it would actually have the opposite effect on President Biden, because he is still kind of raw about what happened in 2016 in that sense. I've heard people say, look, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Jim Clyburn, they have some influence with him. Jim Clyburn today said, no, we have to, stay the course. That's what they're going to say, of course, publicly for now. But the truth is, you're right. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of peers left, people that he respects, who served with him for years in the Senate and whose opinions really matter to him. And I think the people around him in his inner circle, they love him. They really respect and admire him. And I think they have a hard time. It's a very hard thing to tell somebody, we think there's a real issue here with age, if they actually do think so. And I think that there's no evidence right now that they're doing that or have done that. I did some reporting recently for a story, and I found that nobody could tell me there was any kind of process in terms of making a decision of whether to run for re-election or not outside of his family. Nobody had a sit-down meeting that they could describe in which they said, let's go over the pros and cons here. Let's see what the drawbacks might be and really discuss it. They just simply waited until he told them he was going to run again. And I think that that's where we're at now.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.